My father-in-law tried to take my car the night before we closed on our house. And the worst part is that by the time I understood what he was doing, everyone else acted like I was the only person who had missed the memo. That stayed with me more than the argument itself. Not the keys, not the boxes in the back seat, not even the way he looked at me when I told him no. What stayed with me was the way the room seemed to treat his decision as normal before I had even been told there was a decision. We were supposed to close the next morning. After months of inspections, bank emails, document requests, missing signatures, rescheduled calls, and the constant low-level stress that comes with buying a house, we were finally at the point where everything was lined up. The funds were ready, the appointment was confirmed, and all we had to do was show up, sign, and walk out with keys. It should have felt like relief. Instead, the night before closing felt like stepping into a situation that had been moving without me for longer than I wanted to admit. My wife had insisted we go to her parents' house that evening. She said it casually, like it was just dinner, and at the time I did not question it because both of us had been living inside checklists for weeks. Our apartment was half-packed, our kitchen table was covered in folders, and I was tired enough that the idea of eating food someone else cooked sounded like a small mercy. Her dad met us at the door already mid-sentence about the next day. That was normal for him. He liked being useful, but his version of useful usually came with a clipboard in his head and a strong opinion about how everyone else should move through the world. "Tomorrow's going to be tight," he said as he stepped aside to let us in. "You have the bank appointment at 9, right? You don't want to be late with how they schedule these things." "I know," I said. "We're planning to leave early." He nodded as if he approved of the answer, then glanced past me toward the parking area where my car was sitting. The look was brief enough that I did not register it as important, but it stayed somewhere in the back of my mind because it did not match the conversation. Dinner looked normal from the outside. Her mother asked about the apartment. My wife talked about the last box we still had to pack. Her dad asked practical questions about closing, parking, timing, paperwork, what route we planned to take, and whether we had printed enough copies of everything. None of it sounded wrong on its own, but the conversation kept circling logistics so tightly that it stopped feeling like excitement and started feeling like preparation for something I had not been included in. At one point, he asked where I planned to park in the morning. "In front of the office," I said. "There's a lot nearby." He shook his head slightly, not arguing, just making it clear he thought I had chosen the weaker plan. "Those lots fill up fast. You don't want to be running around looking for a spot when you have closing documents to sign." "I'll figure it out," I said. He let it go, but not really. He just nodded again, like he was storing that answer for later. After we had eaten, my wife went into the kitchen with her mother, leaving me and him at the table. He leaned back in his chair and said, almost casually, "Once the house is yours, you'll probably need to rethink the whole car situation." I looked at him, not sure where that had come from. "What do you mean?" "You're moving farther out," he said. "Different commute, different routines, more errands. One car is not always enough when you own a place, especially if something breaks or someone needs to move things." "We've managed fine so far," I said. "That's because you have been in a different situation so far," he replied. "This is a step up. Things change." It sounded like advice, and that was what made it easy to ignore. He was not wrong that owning a house changes routines. He was not wrong that moving requires planning. The problem was the way he said it, like the conclusion had already been reached, and he was only giving me time to arrive there. I let it go, which became a theme that night. For the rest of the evening, he kept returning to the same idea in different clothes. We needed to plan ahead. We could not assume things would work like before. We had to think like homeowners now. Each statement was reasonable enough to pass as normal advice, but together they felt like fence posts marking the edge of something. When we got up to leave, I went to grab my keys from the small table near the entrance, where I was sure I had put them when we walked in. They were not there. I checked my pockets, then the counter, then the chair where I had been sitting, and for a second I felt foolish, like the stress of the week had finally started making me lose track of basic things. "You lose something?" he asked. "My keys," I said. "I thought I left them here." He stood up slowly, reached into his own pocket, and pulled them out. I moved them. Didn't want them sitting out. He held them for a second longer than necessary before giving them back. It was small enough that arguing about it would have made me look petty, but not small enough to feel normal. He had picked up my keys, carried them around, and only mentioned it when I noticed they were missing. "Next time, just leave them," I said, keeping my tone even. He smiled like I had missed the lesson. You'll understand once you're dealing with your own place. On the drive home, my wife was quiet for a while. She looked at her phone, probably checking emails about the closing, and I could feel both of us thinking about the same thing without naming it. Eventually, she said, "He's just trying to help." I didn't say he wasn't, I replied. He gets like that when things are changing, she added. He thinks ahead. I noticed. She glanced at me. Don't read too much into it. Tomorrow is going to be long enough without adding anything extra. That line stayed with me because it did not feel like reassurance. It felt like a request to leave a door open that should have been closed already. When we got back to the apartment, I put the keys on the kitchen counter in plain sight, right beside the closing folder. I remember doing it deliberately, partly because I wanted to know where they were in the morning, and partly because I wanted to prove to myself that I was not making a big deal out of nothing. The next morning started earlier than it should have, not because I was excited about the closing, but because my mind had already started listing every possible way the day could go wrong before I even opened my eyes. For a few seconds, I stayed in bed and mentally checked the documents, the appointment time, the wire confirmation, the IDs, and all the little details that suddenly feel dangerous when you are only a few hours away from signing for a house. Everything was supposed to be handled, but my body clearly did not believe that, because I felt tense before my feet touched the floor. When I walked into the kitchen, the first thing I noticed was not the coffee machine or the folder of closing documents. It was the empty spot beside them, exactly where I had left my car keys the night before. I tried to give the situation the most harmless explanation possible. Maybe I had moved them without thinking. Maybe they had slid under something. Maybe I was just tired and mixing up where I had left things. I checked the counter, the shelf near the door, and the pockets of the jacket I had worn to her parents' house, but the keys were gone. That feeling from the previous evening came back immediately. Only this time it was not vague enough to ignore. I walked back into the bedroom and asked my wife if she had moved them. I kept my voice neutral because I did not want to start closing day with an argument. But when she said no, her face changed just enough to tell me she had reached the same conclusion I had. Before either of us said her father's name, my phone buzzed. The message was from him. "Call me when you're up." I showed it to my wife, and she let out a quiet breath that was not quite surprise and not quite confusion. That bothered me almost as much as the missing keys. I called him, and he answered immediately, like he had been waiting with the phone in his hand. "Morning," he said, in the same steady tone he used whenever he wanted something to sound practical. "You guys up?" "Yeah," I said. "Do you have my keys?" There was no hesitation. "Yeah, I've got them." For a moment I did not answer because I was still processing how casually he had admitted it. He did not sound like someone who had crossed a line. He sounded like someone confirming he had picked up milk. "Why do you have my keys?" I asked. "I needed to move the car," he said. "I didn't want it sitting where it was." That answer made no sense. The car had been parked legally outside our apartment, in the same place I always parked it, and we had not asked him to move anything. The more calmly he spoke, the worse it sounded. "You came here this morning?" "Early," he said. "I didn't want to wake you." He said it like the quiet part made it considerate, as if the issue was not that he had come over, taken my keys, and moved my car without asking, but that he had done it politely. "Where's the car now?" I asked. "At my place," he said. "You can grab it on the way." That was when it stopped feeling like a strange misunderstanding and started feeling like a decision that had been made around me. "You took my car to your house," I said. "I moved it," he corrected. "Relax. You'll have it before the appointment." Relax was the wrong word. It pushed the problem away from what he had done and onto how I was reacting, like my tone was the only thing out of place. "We are closing in a few hours," I said. "I need my car." "And you'll have it," he replied. "Come by, we'll sort it out, and then everyone can get where they need to go." I looked at my wife while he was still talking. She was sitting on the edge of the bed now, tense and quiet, but she was not telling him he had no right to do that. She was not even reaching for the phone to take over the conversation. She looked stuck, and that hesitation mattered. "I'm coming now," I said. "You don't need to rush. We've got time." "I'm coming now," I repeated, and I ended the call before he could turn it into a longer discussion. The drive to her parents' house felt longer than it should have. My wife sat beside me with her phone in her hand, occasionally waking the screen and locking it again without doing anything, while the silence between us took that strange shape it gets when both people are circling the same problem from opposite sides. After a few minutes, She tried to soften it. He probably just thought it would be easier this way. I kept my eyes on the road and asked whether she meant easier for us or easier for him, because those were not the same thing. She did not answer right away. When she finally did, she said he probably saw the parking situation, the timing, and the closing appointment, and decided he could help by moving things around before we got up. That explanation might have sounded reasonable if my keys had not disappeared from my own kitchen and if my car had not somehow ended up at his house before I was even awake. He didn't ask, I said. I know, she replied, but the words came out tired instead of firm. I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm just saying he probably didn't mean it like that. I almost asked what like that meant, because by then I was starting to hate how much work everyone was doing to avoid naming his actions directly, but we were almost there, so I let the question sit. When we pulled up to her parents' house, my car was in the driveway, but not the way I had left it. The driver's seat was pushed farther back than I keep it, the mirrors had been adjusted, and even from outside I could see boxes stacked across the back seat. I got out without saying anything and walked straight to the car. The inside smelled different, not dramatically, but enough to make it clear someone had been in it longer than a quick move would require. The radio was on a station I never used. The glove compartment was not fully closed, and the back seat had been filled with packed boxes labeled in marker, which made it obvious this was not a temporary accident. I turned around and asked why his boxes were in my car, keeping my voice controlled even though the answer already seemed to be sitting in front of me. He was standing near the driveway with coffee in one hand, looking completely comfortable. The strangest part was that he did not look defensive or embarrassed. If anything, he seemed confused that I thought this needed explaining. I told you, he said. We're moving some things around because it makes more sense this way. The word "we" bothered me more than the boxes for a second, because he said it naturally, like I was already included in a plan I had never heard. I asked who exactly it made more sense for, and he answered without hesitation that it made sense for everyone. That was when the shape of the situation became clearer. He was not asking to borrow the car, and he was not apologizing for using it. He was speaking as if the car had already been absorbed into the family's logistics for the day, and all I was doing by objecting was slowing down something obvious. You took my keys, moved my car, loaded your things into it, and didn't tell me until I noticed, I said. He gave a small sigh, the kind people use when they want you to feel unreasonable without saying it directly. You're focusing on the wrong detail. Today is about the house. We need to keep everything moving. This is my car, I said. And nobody said it wasn't, he replied. But you're joining a family, you're buying a house, and things are going to be shared now. Sometimes people need to be flexible. That was the first time he said it plainly enough that I could not pretend we were only talking about a weird morning. My wife stepped closer then, not exactly between us, but near enough that I knew she wanted the conversation to stay quiet. She said my name softly and told me we had an appointment soon, which was true, but it also felt like another version of the same message. Not now. Do not make this bigger, just get through the day. I looked at her and asked if she had known he was going to take the car. She shook her head quickly, but not quickly enough to make me feel better. I didn't know he was taking it this morning. That sentence had too many extra words in it, so I asked what she did know. Her father cut in before she answered. She knew we might need to use it for a few things. Don't put her in the middle. I looked back at him and realized he had answered more than he meant to. There had been a conversation. Maybe not the exact plan, maybe not the part where he came over before we woke up, but enough of one that my car had been discussed without me. My wife looked uncomfortable now. It wasn't like that, she said. He mentioned that with the closing and the move, we might need extra space, and I said we would figure it out. But the car was discussed, I said. She looked away for half a second, and that was enough. Her dad set his coffee on the low wall near the driveway and stepped closer, still calm, still acting like the adult in the room. You are making this personal when it is not personal. Tomorrow, next week, next month, you and my daughter are going to need help. You will need people with trucks, tools, time, and experience, and you do not get to take all the benefits of family and then act territorial over every little thing. There it was. Not really about the car, or the parking, or the boxes, but about ownership and permission and who got to decide when my property became available to other people. I'm not territorial because I expect someone to ask before taking my keys, I said. He smiled slightly, not kindly. Keys can be moved. Cars can be moved. The world doesn't end because someone helps you before you ask. I felt my patience thin, but I kept my voice even because I could tell he was waiting for me to sound angry enough to dismiss. You didn't help before I asked. You acted before I agreed. For the first time, his expression changed. Not much, but enough. He looked at my wife, then back at me, and said, "We don't have time for a philosophical argument in the driveway. We have a closing to get to, and after that, we have things to move." The after that landed hard because he had not asked whether my car would be used after closing. He had folded it into the schedule. I opened the back door and looked at the boxes again. They were not emergency items, and they were not something that had to be moved before 9 in the morning. They were household things, tools, kitchen odds and ends, pieces of a plan someone had made because they assumed my car was available. I turned back to him and said the boxes needed to come out before we left. He stared at me like I had said something childish. "They're already loaded." "Then unload them," I said. My wife said my name again, quieter this time, and I could hear the warning in her voice. Not a threat, just fear that this would become the story of the day instead of the closing. Her father heard it too, because he used that opening immediately. "See? She is already stressed enough. You want to start the biggest day of your marriage like this?" I looked at my wife, and for 1 second I almost backed down just to stop the pressure from landing on her. Then I looked at my car again, with his boxes inside, my mirrors adjusted, my seat moved, and my keys having spent the morning in his pocket, and I understood that if I swallowed this to preserve the day, it would not disappear. It would become precedent. I told him again to take the boxes out, and this time I did not explain it. For a few seconds nobody moved, and the whole driveway felt like it was waiting to see who would blink first. Then he laughed once under his breath, not because anything was funny, but because he wanted the refusal to sound ridiculous. "You're really going to do this today?" he said. "No," I answered. "You did this today. I'm stopping it before it becomes normal." He did not move right away. For a moment, he stood there looking at me, trying to decide whether I was serious or just pushing back out of stress, and the way he held eye contact made it clear he was not used to being told no in his own driveway. Then he glanced at my wife in that direct, practiced way people use when they expect someone else to step in and fix the situation for them. "You want to handle this?" She hesitated, which was the worst possible answer she could have given because it did not support him, but it did not support me either. It only confirmed she was caught in the middle of something that had already gone too far. "I just think we should get to the closing," she said quietly. "We can deal with everything else after." That sounded reasonable on the surface, but it was exactly what he had been pushing for since we arrived. Move past the problem without addressing it. Her dad picked up on it immediately. "Exactly. We don't need to turn this into a bigger issue. We'll take care of things after the signing." I looked at him and realized that, in his version of events, there was no scenario where the boxes came out before we left. The only thing he was negotiating was how much resistance I would put up before giving in. "That's not how this works," I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. No. My car doesn't become part of your plan just because we have a closing today." The air shifted again, sharper this time, like we had crossed into a part of the conversation where everyone understood we were not just disagreeing anymore. He took a step closer, not aggressively, but enough to make it clear he was not backing off. "You're thinking too small. You're focused on ownership when you should be focused on outcomes. We're trying to make this whole process smoother for everyone." "That's not what this is," I replied. "It is," he insisted. "You just don't see it yet." I shook my head slowly. "I see it exactly." For a second neither of us spoke, and in that pause I could feel my wife watching both of us, waiting to see where the conversation would go. Then he changed his approach. He did not raise his voice or get angry. Instead, he leaned into something that sounded almost reasonable if you did not pay attention to what it implied. "You're about to close on a house with my daughter," he said. That did not happen in a vacuum. There it was, not said directly but clear enough. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying we've been involved," he replied. "We've given advice, time, and support, and when you build something as a family, you don't start drawing hard lines over small things." Small things. I looked back at the car. Using my car without asking is not a small thing. Taking my keys without telling me is not a small thing. He let out a quiet breath through his nose. "You're making it one. That's the difference." My wife shifted again, stepping a little closer to me. "He didn't mean to cross a line," she said. "He just thought it would help with everything going on today." I turned to her. "Did you know he was going to come over and take the keys this morning?" She hesitated, and that hesitation said more than any answer. I knew he might need to move things around. I asked if you knew he was taking my keys. I said. No, she admitted, more quietly this time. Not exactly. Her dad stepped in before I could respond. This is what I mean. You're getting stuck on how something was done instead of why it was done. The intention matters. No, I said. Permission matters. That landed differently. He did not respond right away, and for the first time since we arrived, the conversation felt slightly off balance in my direction. Then he reset. Fine. If you want to do everything by the book, then let's talk about the book. I waited. You want to close on that house today? Yes. Then we need to move, he said. We need to stay on schedule, keep everything simple, and not create unnecessary delays. I'm not delaying anything. I'm asking you to take your things out of my car. And I'm telling you that's not the priority right now, he said. That was the moment everything clicked into place. He was not negotiating, and he was not really arguing. He had decided his version of what mattered carried more weight than mine, and everything else was something I needed to adjust to. I took a breath, then looked at my wife. Are you okay with this? She looked between us, then at the car, then back at me, and for a second it felt like she might say something that changed the direction of the whole day. Instead, she said, I just don't want a day to turn into a fight. That was the answer. Not yes, not no, just avoidance. I turned back to her dad. The boxes come out. He shook his head slowly. No. The word was not loud, but it was final, like he expected that to be enough. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I took out my keys, walked to the driver's side, unlocked the car, and opened the back door. He watched me. What are you doing? Fixing it, I said. I started lifting the boxes out one by one, placing them on the driveway without rushing, without slamming anything, just steady and deliberate. After the second box, he stepped forward and told me I did not have to do that. After the third, his tone changed, and he said I was making it harder than it needed to be. After the fourth, he said we did not have time for this. I set the box down and looked at him. We do. We just didn't have time to ask me first. That was the line that broke whatever patience he had left. He let out a short laugh, not because anything was funny, but because he had run out of ways to keep the conversation controlled. You're really going to risk everything over a car? No, I said. I'm deciding what I'm not willing to lose to keep things easy. For a second it felt like he might push it further. Then he looked at my wife, saw something in her face, and stepped back just enough to make it clear he would not physically stop me. I finished unloading the boxes, closed the door, and stood there for a moment, looking at the car like I needed to confirm it was actually mine again. Then I turned to my wife. We're leaving, I said. She nodded, not fully comfortable and not fully settled, but aware that the situation had crossed a line she could not pretend not to see. Her dad said nothing as we got into the car. He just watched, and the look on his face was not anger. It was calculation, like he was already thinking about what this meant for everything that came next. The drive to the closing felt different from the drive earlier that morning, not because anything outside the car had changed, but because something between us had. My wife sat angled toward the window, phone in her hands, unlocking it and locking it again without reading anything. And every time I glanced over I could see she was trying to decide whether saying something would make things better or worse. After a while, she said, You didn't have to do it like that. Her tone was not accusatory, but it was not neutral either. It had that weight people use when they are unsure which side they are on, but still feel like something went wrong. I didn't have another way to do it, I said. You could have waited. We could have handled it after the closing. If I waited, I said, it would have been accepted. It would not have stayed a one-time thing. It would have turned into something normal, and next time it would not even be a question. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was trying to understand whether I was reacting to that morning or to something bigger. He was trying to help, she said. I'm not arguing his intention. I'm saying he decided for me. That part did not land cleanly with her. He didn't think of it that way, she said. I know, I answered. That's the problem. The rest of the drive passed in a quiet that was not empty, just unfinished. The closing itself went through without issues. We arrived on time, signed everything we needed to sign, shook the hands we were supposed to shake, and walked out with keys to a place that was officially ours. On paper, it was exactly what we had worked toward. In reality, it did not feel like a clean start. It felt like something had followed us there. When we stepped outside, my wife checked her phone and said her dad had texted. I asked what he said, and she hesitated before answering that he wanted to talk later. That sounds about right, I said. We did not go back to her parents' house that day. We went straight to the new place, unlocked the door, and walked inside without saying much. The rooms were empty. Our footsteps echoed, and the whole place had that strange new house feeling where everything is yours on paper, but still unfamiliar in your hands. For a while, we moved around quietly, opening cabinets and checking things we were not really focused on. Eventually, she leaned against the counter and said, "He's not going to let this go. I'm not asking him to." She turned toward me. "Then what happens?" "We decide what is ours and what is not," I said. "That sounds simple." "It isn't," I admitted, "but it is clear." She crossed her arms, not defensive, just thinking. "He's always been like that. He plans ahead, takes control, and most of the time it works, so nobody pushes back." I figured that out. "You're the first person who has said no like that," she added. That explained more than she probably realized. It was not just about the car. It was about breaking a pattern everyone else had learned to work around. "I'm not trying to fight him," I said. "I'm trying to make sure we don't start our life with lines already crossed." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'm not okay with him taking your keys. I just didn't know how to deal with it in the moment." "That's all I needed to hear," I said. It did not fix everything, but it shifted something. We did not hear from him that day or the next. 2 days later, he called. Not a message, not a soft opener, just a direct call. I answered. "I think things got a bit out of hand the other day," he said after a few seconds. "That depends on how you look at it." He let out a small breath. "I was trying to help. I know. But you didn't ask." There was silence on the line. "That's how I do things," he said finally. "I see what needs to be done, and I do it." "I get that, but it doesn't work when it involves something that isn't yours to decide." Another pause followed, and for the first time his tone shifted slightly. "Things are going to be different now." "They already are," I said. He did not argue with that. He only said, "All right, we'll figure it out." It was not an apology, and it was not a full resolution, but it was the closest he had come to acknowledging that something had changed. We did not go back to the way things were before that. There were fewer assumptions, fewer unspoken decisions, and a lot more space between what was offered and what was accepted. It was not perfect, and old habits still showed up in small comments that leaned a little too far, but they stopped short of crossing the line in the same way. That morning made one thing clear in a way nothing else could. It was not about the car. It was about the moment I realized that if I did not draw the line myself, someone else would draw it for me, and I probably would not like where it ended up. After that, nobody touched my keys again. Not because everyone suddenly understood the point, and not because the family became perfect overnight, but because they finally knew I would not stay quiet just to make someone else's control feel polite. Most people just watch and move on, and that's just fine. But if you're into stories like this, you can subscribe and stick around.